Alright, this is a transition video. We've been studying sona, the Shokwe. This is spelled so many ways too. Whoops. Shokwe are one of many groups of people in northeastern Angola, traditionally, and the sona are their sand drawing tradition. Now we've been studying the sona. Now we're going to look at Celtic knotwork. Now, there's no evidence that one influenced the other. These sorts of line drawings are found all over the world, and knotwork is found all over the world. Celtic knotwork is particularly interesting. It's very vibrant. And there's a nice possible connection here, at least pedagogically, or how do we do the Celtic knotwork? It seems more complicated, and let's try this out. So for sona, we have this grid of dots. Let's take a 2 by 2 dot. We know that it's composed of 2 curves if we're using the plated algorithm. Now, suppose we wanted instead a knot, the grid helps us stay square, but we might want to do some sort of over business, right? So there's over, so then this one will be over, and then see, that will complete, and we'll get something like this. All right, it's a little fancier, and of course this is something that you would see in the sand. Not quite this. What would you see in the sand? It's a good question all by itself, right? In the sand, the last loop that you did would go over both. Right? You'd see something like this, right? Drawing in the sand. But this is nice. These two are linked together. It's kind of a nice effect. Now we might also want to thicken the bands to make it look like leather or rope or some such thing. And so, we might start experimenting with something like this. I'm trying to thicken the bands a bit, and then make them come right up to one another. And there you go. So that's not too bad. It's a little difficult. Now, again, notice these dots are in the centers. There's an empty space here. Sometimes in Shokwe designs, they'll put extra dots in the center of the squares. We could put a dot here. Now, these probably should be the same size, roughly speaking. And so this is going to be the motivation for a technique. There are a bunch of different techniques proposed for Celtic knotworks. And I'm going to mention one of them. And one involves these circles, which give us spacing. Right? So let's imagine then that we're in some sort of a box here. That this fills out a box. And then we have a circle on the intersection of these lines and a circle in the center of each of these. So let's try that idea out. What I'm trying to do here is to motivate or develop the method we're going to use. So it kind of makes sense in the sense of what we've been doing. All right. So this isn't too bad. Now we can refer back to what we were doing. We can see that the distance between the circles also determines the bands. So I've got some right here. So that's put one right here. This is going to be over, and then there's going to be an over down here. There's going to be an over down here, and then we just have to connect these up somehow, right? So something like this. Still, right? This is arguably better, but still quite a few choices have to be made. But it's going to be a little easier than the last one. And to illustrate that, let me kind of highlight the result of this just kind of quickly, and then erase the pencil marks. So in that sense, we have a grid work which doesn't need to remain in the finished design. And in fact, when we look at Celtic knotwork, that's part of the mystery, is we don't know how they made it. We can't see what they had. And to my knowledge and to my research, I haven't found any evidence that there's any leftover books talking about it, as there were a few with the Islamic designs. All right, so that's an improvement. That's kind of cool. We can put these points pretty easily. The square forms a nice scaffold for putting those points in. This is kind of cool. But we can do a little bit better. We had to guess. I had to decide kind of which ones to extend which. And here's the idea. If you see where that square used to be, there's some space between the sides of the square, all right, and the insides of the knot. And the purpose of that observation is the placement of a couple more circles. It's amazing how well this comes out if you freehand it. I'm going to use a ruler, but pretty crudely. I'm just going to make a square grid where the thickness of the lines is the thickness of my protractor here. I'm making no attempt to construct actual squares. And so here's the idea. We're going to, again, put a circle in the center. We're going to put the same size circles here. The idea is that the spacing here is about the same. That determines the spacing of the bands. And the size of the circle gives us these gaps. And then we're going to put some on the edge. Now, technically, all you need is like a half circle, but half circles are possibly harder to draw than full circles. We're only going to use half the circle, though. It's just really this part that we want, because it's going to give us a bit more of a guideline. And here's the idea. Suppose I went back up to the original drawing here, and I had those circles placed. Look what they do. Now if I highlight all the circles, this grid tells me, say right here, look at this. I have a parallel pair of lines here, and then an alternating parallel pair of lines here, an alternating parallel pair of lines here, an alternating pair of parallel lines here, and you can go right out to the edge. You're going right out to the edge of the circles. So it's quite a bit of guidance. Let me show you. So I make a parallel pair. This is going to be a little different than this knot. Another parallel pair. And I'll link to the a YouTube channel where I found this particular construction. And it's because I found this gentleman's video that I'm incorporating this part into the class from now on, just because it makes these drawings doable. The sona are relatively easy to do if I show you. They're hard to do well and hard to do fast and hard to do while you're telling stories. But the Celtic knot work did seem to be beyond ordinary. It seemed to be in the realm of art, if you will. To need some real skill. Well, to make beautiful ones you need skill, but to make decent ones you don't. So I have these bands. Now here's what I do now. All I have to do is, I don't have any sides, let's do the corners. So I just want to make these lines match up. And you could do a rounded corner, that's fine. And the circle gives me the U that I need. And look, there are no choices here. I don't have to worry about which line to do first. I just fill out the corners. Here we go. There's the line. There we go. I like the pointed. I think I'm going pretty quickly here, and definitely not trying to do anything particularly nice. But even still, it's surprising how well these come out. And what's particularly nice about them is that once you set up your grid, it takes care of most of the decision making for you, and allows you to come up with some pretty decent decorations. And you can use these grids to make lots of different knots, and we can also phrase questions about knots mathematically in terms of how many components are there. These knots here, well, they're not knots, they're links. To be fair, nothing's knotted. there's just these two pieces that are linked together. And then it's exceedingly easy to do a little, whatever, shading. For those of you that have the, I always forget these things are called, smudge sticks. You can do really nice stuff where there's some shadows, with the bands, cross each other, and then you can kind of make a nice gradient going out. So it's surprisingly easy to produce decent knots this way. I'll show you. I have a couple of my own to find, and I don't have a lot of practice drawing, I guess, but all the same, this is one I'm still coloring. This has 3 different links. Right, so it has this green link, and orange link and blue link. I'm just doing some shading there. Makes it look quite nice. And I was experimenting with non-rectangular grids. Here's one that's I haven't even erased the pencil marks to. Again, it comes out remarkably nice, I think. And here are some ones in a 3x3 grid. You should be able to spot the presence of break lines that we saw with the sona. And there we go. This is the same one with some pointed corners. Here are 3 different components. And in fact, if you look at this, this is really the same structure as the tortoise, Lusona. It's just in Celtic knotwork now. There's another one. Another experiment there with break lines. So, thinking about how many components, do you have here, consider how many you have. This is one component, right? A couple of break lines in there, say, versus the original 3x3 grid where there's 3 separate components. Or here's another 3x3 grid, and what do we have here? 1 component. So these are what we're going to look at. So a lot of the mathematical properties we gained looking at the sona will go over to the knotwork. And moreover, it's fairly easy to make something that looks halfway decent. And with a little bit of time, it looks better. But, so yeah, hope this is helpful.